I've worked hotel maintenance for 11 years, across 4 different properties. You see things in that job that would genuinely surprise most people. What guests do to rooms, what gets left behind, and what people think they can get away with inside a building they're only borrowing for 2 nights. I stopped being shocked by most of it a long time ago. I'm telling you that so you understand that what happened at the Aldrin last spring wasn't something I spooked easily into doing. I know what I saw and I know what it means, and I'm still not fully over it. It was a Tuesday night, close to 11 o'clock. I was doing a routine check on the 4th floor, HVAC unit, when the call came through my radio. Room 1312 reporting an issue with the bathroom. Calm voice, no urgency. Just a guest complaint routed through the system the way they always are. I radioed back to the front desk to confirm the ticket. There was a pause on the other end, longer than it should have been, and then Maya, our overnight desk clerk, asked me to repeat the room number. It said 1312. She told me to come to the desk. Found her standing back slightly from the computer with her arms crossed, looking at the screen like I had said something rude to her. She told me the Aldrin had 12 floors. I said I knew that. She pulled up the elevator panel diagram on her screen and pointed. Floors 1 through 12. Lobby, basement. No 13. She said the hotel had a 13th floor once, a long time ago before she worked there, before anyone currently on staff worked there. She said she didn't know exactly what happened though. Something in 1987. The floor got sealed and as far as she knew, nobody had been up there since. She said the call I received had to be a system glitch. I told her I was going to check the stairwell access anyway. She told me she'd rather I didn't go alone, and I told her I'd be 10 minutes. The 13th floor stairwell access was behind a utility door on 12 that I'd walked past probably 1,000 times without thinking about. The bolt on it was old, the kind that should have been completely seized with age and rust. It wasn't seized. It moved stiffly, but it moved, and when I put my shoulder into the door, it opened. The smell hit me first. Stale and close, like a room that hadn't seen fresh air in decades, but underneath, that's something else. Something lived in. The hallway was dark, and I used my flashlight. The carpet was the old kind, a pattern they stopped making in the 80s, thick with dust. Wallpaper peeling off in long strips. All the room doors closed. It looked exactly like it was supposed to be. An abandoned floor, untouched since Reagan was president. Except for the path. Down the center of the hallway, through the dust on the carpet, the path had been worn. Not a single trip, repeated walking, back and forth over a long period of time. It led straight down the hall to the last door on the right, room 1312. The door was slightly open with a thin line of pale light coming from inside. I stood in the hallway for a moment and listened. Nothing. I pushed the door open. Somebody had been living there. A bedroll on the floor beside the bed. Stacked cans of food on the desk. A duffel bag half open with clothes inside. A battery-powered lantern still warm to the touch. A layer of grime on everything except the areas that had been recently used. The desk, a cleared section on the floor, and the bathroom doorway. I went to the bathroom. The mirror above the sink had some names written on it. Floor to ceiling, edge to edge, written in something dark and rust-colored that I knew immediately wasn't marker. Some of the names near the top were old and faded to almost nothing. Others lower down there were darker, more recent. There were more names on that mirror than I could count standing there. I was still reading them when I heard the stairwell door at the end of the hall open. I turned off my flashlight. I stood completely still in the bathroom doorway, listening to slow, unhurried footsteps move down the hallway toward the room. They stopped just outside the door. I could hear breathing on the other side of the wall, steady and calm, like somebody who had no idea I was there or didn't care. Then the footsteps moved away, back down the hall. The stairwell door opened and closed. I gave it 2 full minutes before I moved. On my way out, I swept my flashlight under the bed and stopped. There was a wooden box, the kind you'd keep documents in. I pulled it out and opened it. Keycards, dozens of them, stacked and loose, all deactivated, all with room numbers written on them in black marker. Different numbers, different floors, spanning what looked like many years based on different card designs and formats from different eras of the hotel's history. Underneath the key cards were photographs, printed, standard size, bundled in loose stacks. I flipped through them with my flashlight. Guests, taken without their knowledge through windows and cracked doors and in hallways, hundreds of them going back what looked like years. My hands were shaking by the time I reached the bottom of the box, where a single stack was rubber banded separately from the rest. All the same woman, taken over what looked like multiple visits, different seasons based on her clothing. The early photos were taken from a distance. They progressed. The last one in the stack was taken inside a hotel room. Low light with a woman asleep in bed, taken from close enough that I could see the detail of her face clearly. I recognized her. Not personally, but from a news story I'd seen a couple years back. A woman who had stayed in the Aldrin for a work conference in 2019 and never checked out. They found her 3 miles away. The case was still unsolved as far as I knew. I called 911 from the stairwell and waited on the 12th until they arrived. They swept the floor and found the room empty. Whoever had been in that hallway was gone, and whatever access point that used to come and go was something. Investigators are apparently still trying to locate inside the building structure. The box was taken as evidence. The mirror was photographed and documented. The detective assigned to the case called me the following morning with a question. She asked if I had written anything on the mirror myself or touched it in any way. I said no and asked why. She paused and then told me there was a name at the very bottom of the mirror, written smaller than the others, below everything else like it had been added last. It was my name, and underneath it my work schedule for the current week, written out day by day. I haven't been back to the Aldrin since. I don't know how long that floor was being used or how many of those names mean what I think they mean. The investigation is ongoing and I've been told not to discuss specifics, which is part of why I've kept this vague. My friends and I would often go to a small lake that was surrounded by a hiking trail, with paved parking, barbecue areas, etc. On the opposite side of the lake, and accessible by the trail, there was a popular swimming hole with one spot in particular that offered a cliff, probably 10 feet above the water, that offered a fun plunge. One Saturday, my friends were out of town, but I was very close to my youth pastor and his girlfriend, whom I'll call Kay. She was probably 20 at the time and was a great mentor to us teenagers, so I really enjoyed spending time with her. She was outdoorsy and invited me there to go swimming that day, so off we went. Everything was fine and dandy, a quiet day. The water was dirty, but felt like a good respite from the heat. It was just the two of us there at the swimming hole. We were swimming around the spot on the opposite side of the lake, just the two of us, laughing, talking, etc. I'll never forget it, but all of a sudden I had an incredible twisting feeling in my stomach, and my hearing and vision seemed to oddly sharpen immediately. I stood perfectly upright on my feet in the shallow water, doubled over and grasping my chest. Within 5 seconds of seeing this happen, Kay could tell something was wrong with me, and we both went completely silent and still as I looked at her confused. In our brief silence, we could faintly hear 3 men talking nearby. We couldn't see anything as the swimming hole was around a bend, but we saw ripples in the water. A boat was approaching. My chest immediately relaxed. I quietly took in a deep breath and stared at Kay while we both stopped swimming to listen closely. Then, clear as day, we both heard them claim which one of us they each intended to keep once they caught us. She's blonde and I'm brunette, while another told them to be quiet. The water carried their voices and they didn't realize it. We heard their plans for brutality. Kay and I had direct eye contact during this 15-second or so experience, at which point she put her finger up to say, "Shh," and pointed frantically at the side of the cliff to climb back up. I've never moved so quietly and quickly in my life. Within 30 seconds, we had climbed our way back to the top of the cliff. The moment we hit the top, we saw a boat come around the bend looking for us. I don't know what or who she saw, but she gave me another shh. We walked away quickly from our shoes and picnic lunch and left them there among the trees. Within 30 seconds away from the shoreline, we fully bolted barefoot around the perimeter of the lake. Because the trail was within 30 feet of the lake all the way back to the rec area, we could hear them start their engine and go around the water, yelling to each other, trying to figure out where we went. We were in flight mode, running straight for 10 minutes back to her car, darting on and off the trail to avoid being seen at the waterline. We jumped into her car and whipped out of there as fast as possible. The parking lot was empty, but luckily they thought we were still at the swimming hole. We could see their boat whizzing around from the parking area as we sped away, shaking and in tears. There was no one around us but us and them, and no cell service because it was secluded. The drive back to my house was only 20 minutes. The rest of the day was a blur, but I do remember her trying to explain something to a 911 operator once we had a signal again. The way her hand shook with her cell phone, dropping it more than once while on the line with the operator, and wiping blood off of my feet. This lake is still a popular spot for both locals and visitors. I want to preface this by saying the police are still looking into it, which is part of why I've been sitting on this for a while. But enough time has passed and I need to put it somewhere, so here it is. This was last February. I was driving back to school after visiting home for the weekend. A trip I'd made probably 30 times by that point. 4 hours across central Ohio on a mix of state routes and county roads. I knew the drive well enough that I usually did it half on autopilot. But I'd left later than I should have, and about 2 hours in, the weather turned bad fast. Not just heavy snow, but a full whiteout. The kind where your headlights just bounce back at you off a white wall and you're essentially driving blind. I slowed to almost nothing, had my hazards on, and was leaning forward over the wheel like that was going to help. I should have pulled over and waited it out. I know that. Instead, I crept along until the road curved, and I did it, and the passenger side tires dropped off the shoulder, and the whole car tilted and slid nose first into a ditch. Not fast, not really violent, just a slow, helpless slide, and then I was stuck at an angle with snow up against the passenger window. No signal, completely dark outside in every direction except for one. About a quarter mile back down the road, there was a farmhouse set back from the road with 2 lit windows on the ground floor. I hadn't noticed it when I passed because I was focused on the road. I sat in the car for maybe 10 minutes hoping another car would come by. None did, so I grabbed my jacket and walked. The property felt wrong before I even got to the door. I can't explain it better than that. The farm looked long abandoned from the outside. A collapsed outbuilding off to the left, old equipment half buried in snow, a dead tree right at the edge of the porch that had been wrapped in some kind of rope or cord for no reason I could figure out. Wind chimes made of what looked like small bones hung above the front door. The animal kind, I assumed, but still. I knocked and told myself I was cold and tired and just reading into things. The man who answered was tall, maybe late 60s, with a wide flat face and pale eyes that didn't quite track together when he looked at you. He smiled immediately, and the smile stayed on longer than smiles usually do after the initial greeting. I explained my situation. He nodded along slowly and then called back into the house without turning his head away from me, which I found strange. And a woman appeared from a doorway behind him. His wife, I assumed. Small, gray-haired, wearing an apron over a house dress like something out of a photograph from 60 years ago. She clasped her hands together when she saw me and said, "Oh, good," in a way that I've thought about a lot since. Not, "Oh, good, you're safe," or "Good, coming out of the cold." Just, "Oh, good," like I was something expected. They brought me inside. The house was hot. Not warm, like really hot. The kind of heat that hits you in the face and makes you slightly sick after being in the cold. It smelled like cooked meat and something under that I couldn't identify. Something older and heavier that the cooking smell was doing its best to cover. Every surface was cluttered. Stacks of old papers, jars of things along the windowsills, crosses and other symbols on the walls that weren't quite right, slightly modified versions of things you'd recognized. Wrong in small ways. There were no family photos. There were no personal touches of any kind that told you who these people were. The adult son was sitting at the kitchen table when they walked me in. He didn't stand or introduce himself. He was younger than them, maybe 40, heavy-set, and he watched me come through the doorway with an expression that wasn't hostile, but wasn't welcoming at all. Just watchful. He looked at me the way you look at something you're still deciding about. I told him I just need to wait out the storm and would be out of their hair as soon as I could get a tow. The old man said, "Of course," and gestured to a chair at the kitchen table like it had been set out for me. Then the woman put a plate in front of me. I hadn't asked for food. I hadn't mentioned being hungry. She just set it down. Some kind of stew, thick and dark, with meat and root vegetables, and a heel of bread on the side. She stood back and folded her hands and looked at me. The old man sat across the table and the son hadn't moved. All 3 of them were looking at me. I said thank you and that I wasn't really hungry. The old man smiled and said I should eat, that it was cold and I needed something warm in me, that she'd made plenty. The woman just said nothing. She kept her hands folded and kept looking at the plate. The son looked at me now. There was something ceremonial about it. That's the only word I have for it. The way they positioned themselves, the way none of them spoke to each other, the total focus on whether I was going to eat. I felt very clearly that refusing was not going to go well, that the warmth in the room would curdle into something else, so I ate. I don't know how to describe the meat except to say it didn't taste like anything I could name. Not gamey like deer or dark lamb. It was soft, and it sat wrong with me immediately. Not in a spoiled food way, but in some deeper way I couldn't locate. Ate about half of it and said it was delicious and that I was full, and the old man nodded and sat back, and something in the room relaxed slightly. The son went outside a while later and came back in and said he could pull my car out with the truck. I said thank you and stood up so fast I nearly knocked the chair back. The old man walked me to the door and shook my hand and held it a beat too long and said to drive safe. The woman watched from the kitchen doorway. She was still smiling. The son pulled my car out without speaking a word to me and went back inside before I'd even started the engine. I drove 4 hours in the snow without stopping once, and I didn't fully breathe until I was inside my apartment with the door locked. About 6 weeks later, a friend sent me to a local news link. A sheriff's investigation had been opened on a property matching that road in approximate location. The article was thin on details, said almost nothing. Just that investigators were looking into the property in connection with a missing persons case out of a neighboring county. The article has since been updated twice, but still says very little. Active investigation, no arrests. I gave a statement. I've been told to accept a follow-up call. I haven't eaten stew since February. I probably won't for a long time. Some nights I wake up and I can still taste it, and I lie there in the dark trying to think about anything else until morning comes. At the end of May 1999, I was headed into my freshman year of high school. That summer, 6 girls from my church and I went on a mission trip to the coast from Riverside, California, to Mount St. Helens, Washington. 3 of the girls' mothers acted as our drivers and chaperones. We basically all piled into an old Chevy van and a station wagon. I got baptized at a historic mission in San Luis Obispo. We spent 3 days in San Francisco and saw the capital, Portland, Oregon, and Yosemite. Basically, we got to see the every worthy landmark and stay in every noteworthy town from SoCal to the Canadian border. When we stayed in Yosemite National Park, we spent 3 nights at the Cedar Lodge. While in Yosemite and sightseeing, the old Chevy van died in the middle of nowhere. Luckily, even though we were unable to get a cell signal, within an hour somebody stopped and helped us. This was so long ago, I don't remember all the details, but basically the owner of the van told us later that the mechanic told her that somebody tampered with the engine. She was very upset by this and said that it was something that was done intentionally. The van had to be abandoned and we had to use a rental the rest of the way. I don't know if it's a coincidence, but it turns out that Carrie Anthony Stainer, aka the Yosemite Killer, was the maintenance man for the Cedar Lodge during this time. He had murdered and decapitated a park ranger by the time we were guests at the lodge. The very next month, he gained access to a room where a woman and her young daughter and her daughter's young friend were staying, under the guise of checking the room for something. Basically, he knocked on the door in the middle of the night, and because he worked for the lodge, they opened the door. He abducted them, assaulted them, murdered, and decapitated them. I can't say that I remember seeing him, but we probably did, as we were there for 3 nights. It's just one of those things that I look back on and think he could have easily knocked on one of our doors, as it was just a few weeks before and decided he wanted to abduct and kill us. I feel incredibly lucky, like I dodged a bullet. If the time frame weren't so close, it wouldn't creep me out as much, but it continues to haunt me 16 years later. I started going to the gym at 4 in the morning because of a parking lot argument. Nothing super serious, but a guy and I reached for the same open treadmill at the same time during peak hours, and he got pretty nasty about it. Like genuinely hostile, and I stood there thinking about how much I hated being around people enough that I drove home, looked up whether my gym had 24-hour access, and rearranged my entire sleep schedule so I'd never have to deal with that again. That was about 8 months ago. I haven't seen another member there before 6 a.m. since. The gym is a mid-sized regional chain, nothing fancy. The location I go to is in a small commercial plaza between a closed sandwich shop and a tax office. At 4 a.m., the plaza is completely dead. My car is always the only one in the lot when I pull in. There's usually one staff member working the overnight, a rotating cast of college-aged kids sitting behind the front desk watching something on their phones, and that's about it. The whole facility is myself. That's the entire reason I do it. So I noticed her immediately. The first time she was there, I assumed she was a member I just never crossed paths with. She was on the treadmill in the far back row when I came in, already running, earbuds in and facing forward. I didn't think twice about it. I did my thing and she did hers. We didn't speak or acknowledge each other. She was still running when I left an hour later. I remember thinking she must be training for something. The second time caught my attention more. Same treadmill, same posture, already going when I walked in. I came in at 4:05 that day because I'd hit a red light. I normally catch green, so it's not like she was timing it to arrive when I did. She was just already there. I told myself she probably came in at 3-something. By the 5th or 6th time there, I had started to notice things. She always wore the same outfit, black leggings, and a gray long-sleeve top. Her hair was always down, which I thought was odd for running. She never varied her machine or her position in the room, and she never looked at me, not once in any direction, just straight ahead at the blank screen of the treadmill, which she never turned on. The screen thing bothered me more the longer I thought about it. Every treadmill in that gym has a monitor you can watch TV on or pull up your stats. Every single person I've ever seen on a treadmill here has the screen on for something. She ran for like an hour with a blank screen, staring at nothing. I want to be honest and say that none of this is inherently strange. People have routines. Some people run at 3 a.m. Some people find screens distracting. I was probably just noticing things because she was the only other person in the room and I'd gotten used to being alone. I wasn't scared of her. She was just a fixture I hadn't expected. But I did start watching her more carefully. It was a Tuesday, roughly 2 months in, when I decided to actually pay attention for a full session. I positioned myself on a machine with a natural sight line to her and just observed between sets while I lifted. She ran at the same pace the entire time. I don't mean a consistent pace the way you'd maintain a target heart rate. I mean identical. No adjustment, no slow stretch at the start, no cooling off at the end. A metronome. Her arms moved the same way every stride. I watched her for like 40 minutes and I could not detect a single variation. I've run enough to know that's not how human bodies move. Everybody fluctuates. Everyone breathes harder at some point or shifts their weight or reaches up to adjust an earbud. But she did none of that. I left before she did, same as always. I sat in my car in the parking lot for a few minutes, doing something on my phone, and when I looked up at the glass front of the gym, I could see the treadmill row from the lot. She was still going, exactly the same. I drove home and didn't sleep. Following week, I came in and went straight to the front desk. The overnight staff that morning was a kid named Brett I'd seen enough times to be on nodding terms with. I asked him casually about the woman who came in early, described her, and mentioned that she was always on the back treadmill. Brett looked at me for a moment and then said there was no women currently active in the member system at this location. I laughed because I thought he was joking or confused. I said I didn't mean staff, I meant a regular member came in before 4 a.m. Most days, back row treadmill. He nodded slowly and said he understood exactly what I was saying. He said their membership at this location had been running low since the new gym opened up on Route 9 the previous year. He pulled up something on his screen and turned it toward me slightly. He said their current active female memberships at this location were 0. Had been for about 3 months. I stared at him. I said that wasn't possible. I'd seen her this morning because she was literally on the treadmill when I walked in. He glanced past me toward the treadmill now. I turned around. It was empty. I asked him if she could be on a guest pass or a trial membership or anything like that. He checked. Nothing flagged for that morning. The key fob scanner logs every entry. According to the system, I was the only member who had badged in since 11 p.m., the night before. I didn't have an answer for that, and neither did he. And after a weird silence, I just went and worked out. I kept looking at the treadmill the whole time. But she was there Thursday. I stood at the front of the gym for a full minute. I walked in, watching her from across the room. Same black leggings, gray top, hair down. Treadmill screen off. Same pace as always. I took my phone out and filmed about 30 seconds of her from where I was standing, then walked up to the front desk and showed Brett the video. He watched it twice and looked genuinely unsettled and said he wanted to check something. He went back to the office and I stood at the desk and looked across the gym at her. She didn't react to any of this. Didn't look over, just ran. Brett came back out with the overnight manager, a woman in her late 30s named Gail, whom I'd seen maybe twice before. Gail watched the video and then looked out at the treadmill row, and her expression flattened in a way that told me this wasn't entirely new information for her. She told me something had been showing up on the gym's internal motion sensors in that section of the building on and off for several months. Always early morning. Always the treadmill row. They'd had 2 overnight staff members report the same thing I was describing. One of them quit the same week he reported it. She said the company had sent out a technician twice to check the sensors and found nothing wrong. I asked her what she thought it was. She said she didn't know. Said the building management had been notified. I looked across the gym. The treadmill was running. The woman was on it. I could hear the belt moving from where I stood. I asked Gail whether she could see her. Gail looked at me for a moment and then looked out at the treadmill and said, yes, she could see something. She said it like that. Something. I canceled my membership that afternoon. I joined the gym on Route 9 and I go at noon now like a normal person does, and I wait for the treadmill if I have to. The guy who works at the front desk there asked me once why I switched over from the other location. I told him the hours didn't work for me anymore. I haven't been back, and I don't even drive past it really. I even have that video on my phone still. I've watched it maybe 4 or 5 times since, and every time I get to the end of it, and the camera pans slightly right, back toward the front of the gym where I was standing when I filmed it, there's a moment just before the video cuts off where you can see the mirror on the far wall behind me. She's standing directly behind me in the reflection. She isn't on the treadmill in the mirror. She's 2 feet behind me, and she's looking right at the camera.